Can talk now to Lord Richard Dannatt, former head of the British Army from 2006 to 2009. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. I think we can take a look at a map actually that shows the situation on the ground while we talk to you. And bearing in mind what we've just had from that UK assessment, 3 weeks into the invasion, when you look at the map and you see the areas that are currently controlled by Russia, that's the areas in red, and the areas in red and white stripes are the areas where there's Russian advancement. What is your view of the state of play?
Well, I think by any reckoning, whatever Vladimir Putin's plan had been, and whatever his timescale was, this is not going according to plan, and it's certainly well behind timescale. I think viewers are looking at the map which you just mentioned. I think at the outset, what he intended to do was a major thrust down from Belarus towards Kyiv, a thrust along the southern coast, and a thrust west from the Donbass area. Well, all that's been achieved so far is minimal penetration down from the north, and we'll come back to that in a moment. In the south, that's where they've made more progress, and you can see that Mariupol is absolutely critical to preventing the link up between Crimea and Russia proper through the Donbass Valley. I think over time it is quite likely that he will take control of Mariupol, despite the brave efforts of the Ukrainians. And in fact, the reporting overnight of the bombing of the cinema or theatre and risking the lives of so many children is actually quite appalling. So whatever his plan was, it is not going according to plan, and it is still well behind schedule. And one has to say that the Ukrainians have fought determinedly and extremely well, proving again the power of the defender against, frankly, a pretty weak and disorganized attacker.
And in terms of strategy, is it a familiar strategy that you've seen in play before in other environments, and would you expect it to change?
Well, I think we need to separate the strategy from the tactics. I think the strategy is failing. If his strategy was to make a lightning strike to Kyiv from the north and to gain control of the south and ultimately gain control of the whole of Ukraine, that strategy is failing. Because his soldiers have made such poor progress on the ground, he's had to revert to the appalling tactic of surrounding towns and then shelling them, hoping to bring the town to submission as a result of the appalling casualties that the civilians will be suffering. And of course, that is what President Zelensky every night he's talking about, every day he's talking about, the pain and the suffering that his countrymen and countrywomen are experiencing. But it is quite remarkable, their resilience and their determination.
What can be done, sorry to come in, I mean, what can be done to effectively counter that Russian tactic? There is President Zelensky says he wants there to be a no-fly zone. Is that the only possible way to take this on?
Well, I'm afraid not. A no-fly zone, as everyone has been arguing, would risk movement towards general war, with all the implications that could have between NATO and Russia. I think the other thing to bear in mind is the practicality of a no-fly zone. If one was attempted to be established, it could be policed, perhaps, but with fixed-wing aircraft. But we've already established the fact that that is a very highly risky thing to do, and the West has written it out. But of course, a no-fly zone. Yes, this is an important point. Yeah. A no-fly zone does not stop missiles or artillery shells or mortar bombs going through the air. And it's the latter, mortar bombs, artillery shell and missiles, that are causing most of the damage in the cities. So a no-fly zone, I'm afraid, is something of a red herring. What can be done, though, and what is being done, is passing into Ukraine from friendly nations, NATO nations, more air defense equipment, which can shoot down drones and can inhibit missiles coming through the air.
OK, so you've clarified the point that I was going to ask, whether it was actually taking away all the concerns around what a no-fly zone would mean in terms of escalation, whether it was the only military way to take on the Russian tactics. But you've said there it's not. But if we look specifically at Mariupol, which is besieged, the city is slowly being razed to the ground. what can be done now to support that, to support the people, and to try to restore the situation there?
The tragedy is, and I'm only going by the reporting which I've seen and other snippets of news and intelligence ones picked up, the situation in Mariupol has been very difficult for getting on for 10 days, almost 2 weeks now. I don't think, frankly, much can be done. The Russians have got control of both sides of Mariupol. They're able to shell that town pretty much at will, and the remaining people there are having a most appalling life. When President Biden described Vladimir Putin yesterday as a war criminal, he's absolutely right. These tactics are appalling, they're bestial, they're certainly contrary to any norms of conventional warfare. This is a war crime in the making, probably verging on genocide.
And when you talk about going against the norms, there's been a lot of speculation as to whether chemical weapons might be used. What would that mean if that were to be the case?
Well, it is quite possible that they may resort to that. But again, that is just another degree of appallingness. And if chemical weapons were to be used in principally civilian areas, that would be just compounding the level and the number of war crimes being committed. I think Putin and his acolytes need to be aware that everything that is going on is being carefully logged, evidence is being gathered, and there will come a time when these people will be indicted for war crimes. Whether they can actually be imprisoned and face a trial is another matter. But there is no doubt that the judgment of history will be that Putin and his generals have been conducting war crimes of a most appalling fashion. And if they were to use chemical weapons, that only increases the magnitude of the awfulness.
And you use the word genocide, and I assume as a former head of the British Army, you do not use that word lightly. Yeah.
Well, I spent quite a lot of time in the Balkans in the 1990s, and if you look at what happened in Srebrenica, when 8,500 Muslim men and boys were murdered systematically by the Serbs, this is akin to that level of criminality. And I've given evidence against General Mladic and General Krstic at the International Criminal Tribunal in The Hague against those for war crimes, and the word genocide was associated with that. These crimes are on the same sort of level, and Vladimir Putin must be made aware, if he's not already aware, that he is standing in great danger, and also committing the most appalling atrocities. And irrespective of what news actually is reported in Russia, I think we can all have confidence that what we're understanding is true. It is not fake news, it's appalling, and the truth will eventually out, even if it takes quite some time to do so.
The threat, though, of facing the consequences of actions potentially a very long time down the line, is that likely to have any impact, or does it potentially actually make a mindset go another way, which might be to think, well, now we've gone this far, there's no way back?
Well, that's quite possible, but one of the things that's become fairly obvious in the last few weeks is the sense of history that Vladimir Putin has. He's been referring back to the days of the Soviet Union, he's been referring back to Catherine the Great and Peter the Great, and he has a great sense of his place in the flow of Russian history. Well, over time, his contribution to Russian history will be the leader at a moment when war crimes were perpetrated apparently in the name of Russia, but actually rather more just at his behest. And he won't go down as a hero, he will go down as a villain of great magnitude.
What's your view of what more can be done as this unfolds to try to mitigate the impact?
Well, I think there are two things, amongst other things. First of all, is that there must be a concerted effort to try and bring this conflict to a negotiated end. It would appear that there are some direct talks going on between the Ukrainians and the Russians that may or may not make progress. But I believe it's going to need a third-party facilitator. And I think that the most likely area or factor of facilitation probably is the Chinese. Vladimir Putin hates the West, but he fears the Chinese. And so I'm sorry, yes, he hates the West, but he fears the Chinese. But equally,
And to come in there, I mean, there have been reports that Russia's asked China for weapons. China did not give any clarity on whether Russia had even asked China for weapons, and under a lot of questioning from journalists, just kept describing that as fake news and pointing out that it is in the position to do what you're talking about, which is to bring some sort of pressure to bear. But I mean, if China were to offer up military support, that would be another matter again, wouldn't it?
It would, and I think we have to take the reports of Russia asking China for military support at face value. Whether they're true or not, I don't know. But the point that I was making, and not making it very well, is that Russia fears China. Russia fears China because of China's burgeoning economic growth. But at the same time, Russia needs a friend. And because of that linkage, which has got stronger in recent days, going right back to the meeting at the start of the two leaders at the start of the Winter Olympics, it does give the Chinese an opportunity to be the one to put pressure on Russia, to put pressure on Vladimir Putin, to say, look, whatever you were trying to do is not succeeding. This has got to stop. We've got to find a negotiated solution to this. So I think a return by one means or another to negotiation is really critical. The other point is, of course, the West is absolutely right to go on supplying the Ukrainians with ammunition, with additional weapons, anti-tank weapons, anti-aircraft weapons to stiffen and enable their resistance. Their spirit is fantastic. They will at some point run short of weapons and ammunition, and we should quite properly go on supplying them. But I think it has to be remembered that conflicts such as this throughout history rarely end with one side winning and the other side being defeated. They invariably end around a negotiating table. And the sooner the parties can realize that, and in particular Putin can realize that, then the sooner they'll get round the table and start to negotiate. What the terms of that negotiation will be is a completely another issue. But that's where the pressure should come from the diplomats of the world to get the parties around a table and start negotiating an end to this appalling series of events.
Lord Dannatt, thank you very much.
Thank you.